It begins after closing time, in the quiet halls where the dust settles not just on surfaces, but on time itself. Here, under the low, focused light, the day's noise recedes, and the objects are allowed to resume their own silent conversation. We are not here to learn, but perhaps to remember something that was carefully forgotten. The air is still, heavy with the weight of things that have outlasted their makers, their cities, and their gods. We move through these spaces as if through layers of earth, descending toward a single point of origin, a question that was never meant to be asked. In this gallery, most visitors pass by quickly, seeing only a collection of stone vessels. But if you stay long enough, you begin to feel the stillness is not empty. It is a presence. It is the beginning of a record that was never written down. In the vitrine, it rests on a simple mount. The museum's catalog entry is precise, administrative, and final. Object 12045, listed as a diorite ceremonial bowl, excavated from the temple precinct at Uruk, dated to the late 4th millennium BCE, approximately 3300. Its purpose is designated as ritualistic, a container for sacred offerings, a common function ascribed to finely crafted vessels from this period. The description is less than 50 words, a neat and tidy label for an object that has survived for over 5,000 years. It is an answer that closes a door, satisfying the need for classification. The label does its job perfectly. It explains the object away, allowing the eye to move on to the next exhibit, the next neatly categorized piece of a distant, understandable past. The file is closed, the object is known. Or so the record states. The difficulty is not in the label, but in the stone itself. Diorite is an igneous rock of immense hardness, ranking between 6 and 7 on the Mohs scale. The known Sumerian toolkit of this period consisted of copper chisels, which barely register a 3, and stone hammers, effective for rough shaping but wholly inadequate for the level of detail we see here. To work a material this resistant with such tools is a feat of patience that borders on the impossible. To achieve not just form, but a finish that feels almost liquid to the touch, to carve walls so thin they are nearly translucent against the light. This suggests a process that does not align with the material culture we have so carefully reconstructed. The object sits in defiance of its own making, a quiet, physical contradiction to the tools found in the same layer of earth beside it. One can only observe it for a time. The eye traces the perfect, unbroken curve of the lip. There are no facets, no telltale signs of hesitant percussion. The symmetry is absolute, as if turned on a machine that did not yet exist. The light pools in its dark, polished interior, a small, contained darkness. Outside the glass, the world continues its business. But in here, time is suspended around this single form. This object does not feel like it was chipped away from a larger block of stone. It feels as if the stone itself was persuaded to assume this shape, as if the form was an inherent potential within the material that was simply released. The silence in the room deepens, and the bowl seems to absorb it, holding it as it might have once held water or grain. It is an artifact of function, but the function it implies is one of process, of a lost method. To understand the depth of this silence, we must turn from the object to the men who lived alongside it. We must go to the archives, to the 250,000 clay tablets that have survived them. The Sumerian scribe was not a poet or a mystic. He was an accountant of reality. His stylus moved with a dispassionate precision, recording the world in lists, ledgers, and receipts. Tablet BM 7.751 documents the daily beer rations for a team of laborers over a 5-day period. Tablet W 2027-4 details the precise dimensions for a new canal, including the volume of earth to be displaced. They recorded the number of sheep in a temple flock, the interest on a silver loan, the legal precedent for a property dispute. Their world was built on the meticulous, obsessive documentation of the mundane. Nothing was too small to be counted, measured, and filed away. This is where the first unsettling question begins to form. We stand before a civilization that invented bureaucracy, that saw the act of recording as fundamental to its existence, a people who documented the process for making bread and weaving cloth with procedural clarity. Yet, when we search this vast, unparalleled library of administrative texts for any mention of the techniques used to create objects like the diorite bowl, we find nothing. There are no schematics, no training manuals for apprentices, no records of the workshops or the strange tools required. A scribe who notes the allocation of 3 goats for a festival would surely note the commission of a vessel that would require a lifetime of labor to produce. The textual void is absolute. The object exists, but within the most complete written record of the ancient world, it is a ghost. A pause is required here, a moment to let the weight of that absence settle. It is not an absence of evidence, but an evidence of absence. It suggests a deliberate omission, a compartmentalization of knowledge so fundamental that it changes the very nature of the society we thought we knew. The wind might stir the dust outside a window, a faint sound from a world 5 millennia away. The silence in an archive is different from the silence in a tomb. It is not the silence of the dead, but the silence of the deliberately unsaid. It is the space between the lines of every tablet, a void that grows larger and more defined the more records we examine. What does it mean when the most advanced objects of a civilization are the only things its people chose not to write about? The disturbance grows when one realizes this is not an isolated case. In the back rooms of museums, in storage drawers labeled miscellaneous cultic items, the pattern repeats. From a dig site at Ur, a small, gear-like object made of marble, its teeth cut with a precision that suggests a functional mechanical purpose. From Nippur, a piece of rock crystal, ground into a plano-convex shape, a lens found in a layer of earth thousands of years before the accepted invention of optics. From Eridu, fragments of what appear to be models of flying machines, catalogued as votive offerings in the shape of birds. Each one is a masterpiece of craftsmanship. Each one is a technological anomaly. And each one is accompanied by the same profound, deafening silence in the cuneiform record. They are a class of artifact that exists entirely outside the written history of the people who made them. We are left not with a mystery of a single object, but a pattern of structured silence. On one hand, we have the material evidence, a collection of artifacts suggesting a level of technical knowledge far beyond what is accepted for the period. On the other, we have the textual evidence, an exhaustive record of daily life that meticulously ignores these very creations. It is a contradiction on a civilizational scale. The accepted narrative of history is one of linear progress, of invention building upon invention. But these objects do not fit. They are like inherited tools in a workshop where the instruction manual has been lost, or perhaps was never provided. They were used, they were valued, but their origin and the science behind them were seemingly not subjects for discussion or record. It is late. The guards will soon make their final rounds. The low lights will be extinguished, and these objects will be returned to the darkness where they have spent most of their existence. For those who remain here, in this quiet inquiry, there is a shared understanding. We are not looking for a simple explanation, for a story of ancient aliens or a lost golden age. We are here for the gravity of the question itself. We are here because the silence of the scribes has spoken more loudly than any inscription. It suggests a layer of reality that was known but not recorded, a truth that was lived but not told. To stay with this question is to accept that the past is not a settled place, but a landscape of deep and resonant shadows, and some things are understood not by what is present, but by the shape of what is missing. To find the context for this silence, we must leave the museum gallery and enter the archive. The air here is different, drier, cooler, and filled with the faint, earthen scent of baked clay. We are looking for a specific document, though it exists in several fragments. It is known to scholars as the Sumerian king list. Let us consider the copy designated WB4444, a small clay prism inscribed on four sides in a neat, compact cuneiform. It is not a story or an epic poem. It is an administrative document, a list of successions, as dispassionate as a modern spreadsheet. It begins not with a creation myth, but with a simple, declarative statement. After the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. Then it begins to list the rulers. The first is Alulim. The scribe notes his reign lasted for 800 years. There is no commentary, it is just a number entered into a ledger. The list continues with the same procedural calm. After Alulim, it states, Alalangar ruled. His tenure is recorded as 36,000 years. The scribe's stylus moved with the same steady hand used to tally sacks of grain or measure plots of land. These are not presented as myths or allegories. They are presented as regnal periods, administrative terms of office. The document then notes a change in the seat of power. Then Eridu fell, and the kingship was taken to Bad Tibira. The transfer of authority is noted as a simple administrative event, a change of headquarters. The numbers that follow are no less precise, no less immense. In Bad Tibira, 3 kings ruled. Enmen-Lu'ana is listed with a reign of 200 years. Enmen-Gal-Ana follows for 800 years. Then Dumuzid, the shepherd, for 36,000 years. The total for these 5 pre-Diluvian kings is given as 200 years. One must resist the urge to interpret these numbers as mere symbols. The list structure resists such easy dismissal. It is methodical, sequential, and cross-references cities that we have since excavated from the desert sands. It reads like a genuine attempt at history, a record kept by a bureaucracy that saw the world in terms of quantifiable data. The scribe who inscribed this prism was trained in a tradition of meticulous accuracy, where a single misplaced wedge could alter the meaning of a legal contract or a royal decree. He was not writing poetry. He was maintaining a file. The sheer scale of the numbers, presented with such administrative dryness, creates a cognitive dissonance. It is a perfect record of an impossible past, a history that feels more like a data log from another form of existence, one with a different understanding of time itself. The list continues, its tone unwavering. After the section on the kings of Shurupak, the scribe inserts a line of immense gravity with the same bureaucratic detachment used for all other entries. It simply states, "Then the flood swept over." This cataclysm, which echoes through the foundational myths of countless later cultures, is presented here as a line item in a historical summary, a demarcation point in the long ledger of power. It is an event that closes one chapter of the accounting and opens another. It is not described with terror or awe, but with the finality of a closed file. The world before this event and the world after are separated by this single impassive sentence, as if a great reset had occurred in the cosmic administration. Following this entry, the record resumes with the same procedural formality. After the flood had swept over and the kingship had descended from heaven, the kingship was in Kish. A new era begins, with a new set of rulers. The reigns are shorter now, yet still far beyond any known human lifespan. The first king of the new dynasty at Kish, Jushur, is said to have ruled for 200 years. He is followed by Kula-Sina-Bel for 960 years. The list proceeds through 23 kings of the first dynasty of Kish, their reigns measured in centuries. The numbers have been scaled down, but they remain stubbornly outside the bounds of our biological reality. The scribe continues his work, recording the impossible with the same diligence he would use for the possible, because for him it was all just data to be entered. For every line on the king list, there are 1,000 tablets like the one stored in these drawers. Let us pull one out at random. Tablet BM 82-323-131. It is a receipt for 24 goats. delivered to the temple of Inanna for a festival. The scribe has noted the date, the name of the herdsman, and the official who received the delivery. Every detail is accounted for. The world documented here is one of absolute, tangible reality. It is a world of livestock, of commerce, of human beings with names and professions going about their daily business. The concerns are immediate and practical. The numbers are small, verifiable, and entirely of this earth. This is the known Sumer, the civilization we have painstakingly reconstructed from its own exhaustive paperwork. Here is another, a legal tablet from the city of Lagash. It details a property dispute between two men over the boundary of a barley field. The text records the testimony of witnesses, the measurements of the disputed land down to the cubit, and the final judgment rendered by a panel of elders. It is a document of profound social order, a testament to a society governed by law, precedent, and the written word. The logic is clear, the language precise. The world it describes is rational, structured, and deeply concerned with the mundane realities of human coexistence. This is the mind of the scribe, methodical, logical, and focused on the concrete details that hold a society together. The contrast between this tablet and the king list is not one of style, but of substance, and another, a small pillow-shaped tablet from a workshop in Ur. It is a set of instructions for a foreman, detailing the allocation of bitumen, reeds, and labor for the waterproofing of a new boat. The quantities are precise: so many bundles of reeds, so many measures of bitumen, so many man-days of labor required for completion. This is the record of a people who built things, who understood materials, and who managed complex projects through careful planning and documentation. They documented the process for everything that constituted their world. We have their recipes for brewing beer, their methods for weaving textiles, their schematics for canal construction. They were a people who wrote everything down, who believed in the power of the record to organize and preserve their reality. Let us pause here, in this quiet archive. Take a moment. Note the time on the device you are watching this on. Register the silence in your own room, the specific quality of the air. Perhaps make a small mark on a piece of paper, a simple line, a circle, a simple act of recording. It is the same impulse that drove the hand of the scribe thousands of years ago. It is a need to fix a moment in time, to make it accountable, to give it a place in the record. This impulse is the foundation of history itself. It is the bridge that connects our world to theirs. And it is this very impulse that makes the omissions in their records so deeply unsettling. The act of recording is not neutral. It is an act of selection, of deciding what matters. Alongside the kings, another, more shadowy list runs through the tradition. It speaks of the Apkallu, 7 sages who are said to have lived before the flood. These figures are not described as gods, but as advisors, as bringers of knowledge. The records, compiled later by the Babylonian priest Berossus, but drawing on these older Sumerian sources, list them by name. The first was Oan, who emerged from the sea to give humanity the foundations of civilization. He did not teach them to invent. The text is clear on this point. He gave them the knowledge whole: writing, law, agriculture, architecture. It was a transfer of a completed system, a data packet delivered to a primitive species. These sages are inextricably linked to the pre-Diluvian kings. Each of the 7 Apkallu is listed as having served as an advisor to one of the early rulers from the king list. They were the keepers of a foundational knowledge, the expert consultants in a vast, ancient enterprise. The record treats their existence as a matter of fact. They founded the 7 primordial cities of Sumer, laying out the temples and organizing the society according to a pre-existing plan. Their knowledge was not emergent, it was complete. They are described not as inventors or prophets, but as something closer to engineers or system administrators, setting up an operating system for human civilization, The nature of this knowledge is never celebrated or mythologized in the administrative texts. It is simply assumed. The scribes do not write hymns to Oans for the gift of writing. They simply use writing to record the number of sheep in a temple flock. The knowledge of the Apkallu is treated as a utility, a piece of infrastructure as fundamental and unremarkable as the rivers themselves. This functional, dispassionate treatment is perhaps the strangest detail of all. It suggests a civilization that was using a technology far beyond its own inventive capacity, a people who had inherited a system so advanced that they did not even think to question its origins. It was simply the way the world worked. This perspective forces us to reread the primary records, not as myth, but as a form of technical documentation for a system we no longer understand. The titles for the rulers, En and Lugal, are not words of worship. They are titles of function. An En was a lord, often with priestly duties, but the term is rooted in the administration of a temple's resources, its lands, its workshops, its granaries. A Lugal, or great man, was a king, a war leader, but also the chief executive of the city-state's corporate entity. These are job titles within a complex hierarchy. The world described in the administrative tablets is not a cosmos of warring gods, but a vast, ancient bureaucracy. The records read like a chain of command, a list of asset managers and regional directors. The impossibly long-reigning kings were the overseers of the pre-Diluvian world. The Apkallu were their technical advisors. The flood was a system-wide failure and reboot. The post-Diluvian kings were the new administrators, working with a degraded but still functional version of the original system. This is the world the scribe recorded. Not a faith, but an organization. The beings and timelines that seem mythical to us were, to him, simply the upper echelons of the management structure, a structure so ancient and foundational that its origins were no longer relevant to the daily task of running the world. A myth can be dismissed as metaphor. A poem can be interpreted as allegory. But an accounting ledger that lists a 200-year tenure for a city manager is a different kind of problem. It is a piece of data that refuses to be anything but what it is. It is a fact recorded without emotion, without elaboration, and without any of the literary devices we associate with fiction. The scribe presents us with a world that operated on principles we cannot currently comprehend, and he does so with the unshakable confidence of a man who is simply recording the truth as it was given to him. The impossibility of the content is made all the more potent by the absolute normality of its presentation. And so we stand between three distinct forms of evidence. There is the physical object in the museum, the diorite bowl, a masterpiece of engineering that should not exist. There is the administrative record of daily life, the receipts for goats, and the legal disputes over land, which paint a picture of a thoroughly practical and earthbound society. And then there is this third category, the cold, bureaucratic record of an impossible history, of kings who ruled for millennia, and sages who delivered civilization fully formed from the sea. Each record is precise, detailed, and internally consistent. Yet they do not seem to describe the same reality. They coexist in the same archaeological layers, written by the same hands. The silence we first encountered in the museum gallery now has a new texture. It is not just an absence of information about how certain objects were made. It is a silence that seems to be a deliberate act of compartmentalization. The scribes recorded the world they managed, the world of barley and bricks and legal codes. They also recorded the framework they inherited, the history of kingship and the transfer of knowledge. What is missing is the link between the two. In all these hundreds of thousands of tablets, in this unparalleled library of a civilization's inner workings, there appears to be no record that explains how the knowledge of the Apkallu was translated into the physical making of an object like the diorite bowl. The operational manual is missing. The scent of baked clay gives way to something else. It is the dust of a different desert, a different river valley. We are no longer in the archives of Mesopotamia, but in the field notes of an excavation thousands of kilometers and several centuries removed. A single figure kneels in the trench, the low sun casting a long shadow. This is the work of the archaeologist, a slow, methodical conversation with the earth, conducted with a brush and a trowel. It is an act of retrieval, of bringing a fragment of a forgotten moment back into the light. The find is not a tablet, but an object of stone, unearthed from a pre-dynastic tomb at Abydos, a place of first kings and foundational rituals. It is a world away from Sumer, yet something here is deeply, unsettlingly familiar. The object is a vessel, catalogued as a ceremonial plate, carved from a block of granite. Like the diorite of Uruk, granite is a material of immense hardness, a challenge for even modern tools. Yet this plate, dated to a period before the Great Pyramids, before the pharaohs had even consolidated their power, displays a level of craftsmanship that seems out of time. Its surface is polished to a mirror sheen. Its form is a perfect spiral, carved from the solid stone, with an elegance and precision that speaks of a machine, not a hand. The archaeologist's gloved fingers trace its impossible contours, feeling the cold, smooth evidence of a process that the historical record does not account for. The tools found in adjacent burials are of flint and copper, utterly insufficient for this task. The work in the field tent continues long after the sun has set. A laptop screen glows, displaying a 3D scan of the Egyptian vessel. Calipers glide across a high-resolution photograph, measuring tolerances that are less than a millimeter. The numbers confirm what the eye suspected. The object's geometry is flawless. It is not an approximation of a shape. It is the shape itself, realized in one of the Earth's most unforgiving materials. The researcher pulls up another file on the screen. The scans of the diorite bowl from Uruk. The two forms are different. One a bowl, one a plate. But the technological signature is identical. It is the same impossible precision, the same mastery over resistant stone, the same silent defiance of the accepted toolkit of the era. And so the anomaly becomes a pattern. The isolated question mark found in a museum in London is now echoed by another, found in the sands of Egypt. Two of the world's oldest civilizations, ostensibly developing in isolation, appear to have possessed the same unrecorded high-level technology for stoneworking. This is no longer about a single artifact. It is about a shared capability, a common inheritance that seems to precede their own distinct cultural expressions. The signature is not Sumerian or Egyptian. It is something older, a foundational layer of knowledge that both cultures seemingly had access to, yet neither chose to document. The silence of the scribes is no longer confined to the banks of the Euphrates. There is a particular quiet that falls over a dig site at night. It is the sound of the deep past reasserting its hold on the landscape. The hum of a small generator is the only anchor to the present. Inside the tent, the two images on the screen, the vessel from Uruk and the plate from Abydos, sit side by side. They are 2 points of light in a vast darkness, two identical questions posed in different languages. To see them together is to feel the ground of history shift beneath one's feet. It suggests that the story we have been telling ourselves about our origins, a story of slow, linear invention, might be missing its most important chapter, a chapter written not in words, but in stone. For those who have remained with us this far, into the late hours of this inquiry, this resonance is likely familiar. It is the quiet hum beneath the accepted histories, a signal that persists even after the noise of empires has faded. It is a recognition that the past is not a settled and fully mapped territory, but a place of deep echoes and recurring patterns that invite not answers, but a more profound quality of attention. To continue this journey is to accept a role as a keeper of the question, to understand that some truths are not found in the final explanation, but in the patient act of observing the connections as they emerge from the dust. The investigation must now expand its scope again, moving further in both time and space. We travel to a high, wind-swept plateau in the Andes, 13,000 feet above sea level. Here lie the ruins of Pumapunku, a site that predates the Inca by 1,000 years. The air is thin, and the silence is absolute. The stones here are not vessels, but massive blocks of andesite and diorite, weighing up to 100 tons. They are the components of a structure that was never completed, left scattered across the plain like the pieces of a giant's abandoned puzzle. The archaeologist here does not use a brush but a laser scanner, trying to comprehend a feat of engineering that defies easy explanation. The problem at Pumapunku is not one of artistry, but of industrial precision. The blocks are cut with perfectly straight edges, interior corners that are flawlessly square, and surfaces that are machine flat. Some feature complex interlocking joints, as if designed to be fitted together without mortar. The most unsettling features are the small, evenly spaced holes drilled into the diorite, and the thin, deep grooves cut into the andesite, lines so perfect they appear to have been made with a power tool. The culture credited with this work, the Tiwanaku, had no writing system, no wheel, and a toolkit of stone and bronze. The logistical challenge of quarrying, transporting, and shaping these immense blocks at this altitude is staggering. The technical challenge of cutting them with this precision is, according to the official record, impossible. The connection is not in the object's form or purpose, but in the process. The diorite bowl from Uruk, the granite plate from Abydos, and the andesite blocks of Pumapunku are three distinct artifacts from three disconnected civilizations. Yet they are united by a common technological fingerprint: the ability to shape extremely hard stone with a level of precision that is incongruous with the known technological level of the cultures that used them. It is a recurring signature of a lost science of materials, a pattern of manufacturing that appears globally without a clear point of origin or a documented lineage of development. The artifacts are the only record. They are the primary documents of a history that was never written down. This pattern of recurrence is not confined to physical objects. We must return to the archives, to the clay prisms of the Sumerian king list. We hold in our minds its strange, cold data. The record of 8 kings in 5 cities, ruling for a total of 241, 200 years before a great flood reset the ledger of history. It is a document that grounds its history in a preceding era of impossible longevity, a foundational period governed by beings who operated on a completely different time scale. We noted it as a unique and unsettling feature of the Sumerian worldview, an administrative record of a mythological time. But it is not unique. We move from the clay tablets of Mesopotamia to the papyrus fragments of Egypt. We are looking at what remains of the Turin King Papyrus, a document compiled during the reign of Rameses II. Though damaged, its structure is hauntingly familiar. Before the first recognized historical pharaoh, Menes, the papyrus lists a line of divine and semi-divine rulers. It speaks of the Shemsu Hor, the followers of Horus, who reigned for thousands of years in a remote, foundational period. Like the Sumerian list, this Egyptian record presents a pre-dynastic history of immense, non-human timescales, a period of stability and order before the world of mortal kings began. The numbers are different, the names have changed, but the fundamental structure of the history is the same. The researcher lays the data out, side by side. On one side of the table, the cuneiform transliteration of the Sumerian king list. On the other, the hieratic transcription of the Turin Papyrus. Two of the world's most influential ancient civilizations, both of whom developed complex systems of writing and bureaucracy to record their world with precision. And both, independently, chose to preface their own recorded human history with a nearly identical framework, a lost era of immense duration, ruled by beings who were not quite gods and not quite men, which ended in a great rupture before the current age began. This is not a shared myth. It is a shared structure for administrative history. A pause is necessary here. The wind that blows across the sands of Giza seems to carry the same dust that settles on the mounds of Uruk. The pattern suggests a common source memory, a foundational narrative so deeply embedded in the consciousness of early civilizations that it was treated not as a story to be told, but as a historical fact to be entered into the official state records. It was the prologue to humanity, the standard operating procedure for how a history was to be organized. The world began, for the accountants of both Egypt and Mesopotamia, not with an act of creation, but with the closing of a previous, impossibly ancient ledger. The pattern does not stop there. In the 3rd century BCE, the Egyptian priest Manetho, commissioned by the Greek rulers of Egypt to compile a definitive history of his land, produced a work that further codified this structure. Drawing on ancient temple records, he too began his chronology not with Menes, but with a long reign of the gods, followed by a reign of the demigods, and then a period of transitional kings, all spanning thousands of years before the first mortal dynasty. This structure, this insistence on a deep, non-human antiquity, was preserved and passed down for 3,000 years, treated by the most conservative and record-obsessed institutions as the literal truth of their origins. We see the archaeologist again, but this time not in the field. He is in the hushed, climate-controlled vault of a university library. The glow is not from a laptop, but from a low-angled light illuminating a fragile manuscript. His hands, steady and patient, turn the pages of a medieval copy of a Roman historian who is quoting a Greek translation of Manetho's lost work. He is tracing the lineage of a single idea, that our history is but a brief chapter following a much longer, stranger, and more orderly prelude. His work is one of connection, of seeing the same watermark on pages written centuries and civilizations apart. It is the slow, quiet assembly of a puzzle whose pieces were never meant to be in the same room. The implication of this recurring textual pattern is profound. It suggests that the leaders of these early civilizations did not see themselves as the inventors of order, but as the inheritors of it. Their own reigns were legitimized by their connection to this primordial, long-lost dynasty. The king lists were not just histories. They were charters of succession, tracing their authority back to a foundational, non-human source of power and knowledge. The world they governed was a post-cataclysmic restoration project, an attempt to rebuild a system whose original blueprints were lost, remembered only in these cold, strange lists of names and impossibly long numbers. And here, the two great patterns we have been tracing begin to converge. On one hand, we have a recurring signature of impossible technology, of a lost science of stoneworking found in the earliest layers of civilizations across the globe. On the other, we have a recurring signature in the official records, a shared administrative memory of a line of impossibly long-lived rulers from a lost primordial age. The silence in the texts about how the stone objects were made begins to feel less like an omission and more like a consequence. The technology may have belonged to the world of the pre-Diluvian kings, to the Shemsu-Hor, to the beings who operated by a different set of rules. We are left with a new, more focused question. Are the artifacts and the king lists two different records of the same phenomenon? Are the impossibly crafted objects the physical legacy of the impossibly long-lived rulers? The texts give these predecessors names and titles, but describe them only by their function, as sages, as followers, as kings. They are presented as the administrators of a forgotten world. The artifacts, in their silent, physical perfection, may be the only direct evidence of that world's capabilities, the only part of the system that survived the Great Reset. They are the hardware left behind by the original programmers of our civilization. To move forward, we must change the nature of our reading. The texts we have examined, the king lists, the administrative ledgers, are not being read in their original context. We are reading them as history or as myth, imposing our own categories on a system of thought that may have had no such divisions, Let us assume for a moment that the scribe was not recording a belief, but an operational reality. Let us assume the hierarchy he documented was literal. The hardware of the impossible artifacts is on the table before us. The software of the administrative state is in the archives. We are looking for the system administrators, the beings who wrote the original code. They are not hidden. They are named, listed, and assigned duties throughout the entire corpus of Sumerian writing. We must begin with the name that has become a vessel for modern myth, but which, in the original cuneiform, is a simple, functional descriptor. Anunnaki. It is not a name laden with divine terror, but a term of classification. It is often translated as those of royal blood or princely offspring. But a more literal rendering, component by component, suggests something else. An for heaven or sky. U, a complex word that can mean and, but also upon. Na, a locative element. Kai, for earth. Those who from heaven to earth came. It is a description of origin and movement, a job title that includes a point of departure. In the earliest texts, they are not a pantheon of gods to be worshipped, but a council, a board of directors, a group of high-ranking figures who make decisions and allocate resources. The records are clear on this point. The Anunnaki are not vague, ethereal beings. They are assigned to specific cities, given oversight of particular domains. The Atrahasis epic, one of the oldest and most complete Mesopotamian creation stories, begins not with a poetic invocation, but with a description of a labor dispute. The junior gods, the Igigi, are tasked with the hard work of digging canals and maintaining the infrastructure of the earth, and they go on strike. The text reads like the minutes of a contentious meeting. The Anunnaki Council is convened to solve the problem. Their solution is not a miracle, but a feat of biological engineering. They decide to create a subordinate worker, a primitive laborer, to take over the burdensome tasks. This new being is what the text calls man. This is the context in which humanity is introduced into the record, as a solution to a logistical problem for a ruling class. The texts do not describe this event with spiritual awe, but with the procedural detail of a project proposal. The creation of humanity is a functional decision made by a committee. The beings who make this decision are described by their roles. Enlil is the chief executive, the commander. Enki is the chief scientist, the master of crafts and engineering, the one who oversees the technical aspects of the project. They are not gods of wind and water in a poetic sense. They are beings with specific, defined responsibilities within a large hierarchical organization whose scope of operations appears to be the planet itself. Their presence permeates the administrative world of the Sumerians. When a king builds a temple, the texts state he is doing so according to a plan laid down by these beings in primordial times. The dimensions are not arbitrary. They are following a pre-existing schematic. When a law code is established, like that of Ur-Nammu, it is presented as the implementation of a divine and timeless justice, a system of order whose principles were established by the Anunnaki. They are the source of the foundational templates for civilization. The Sumerian kings were not inventors of kingship. They were the local managers, the appointed stewards of a franchise. Their legitimacy derived from their adherence to the operational framework established by this higher, non-human authority. Consider the concept of the me, one of the most enigmatic ideas in Mesopotamian thought. They are often translated as divine decrees or sacred essences. But the lists that describe them are strangely technical. The me includes not just abstract concepts like kingship and truth, but also practical skills like writing, metalworking, basket weaving, and the craft of the carpenter. They are described as physical objects, data carriers, that could be stored in temples and even stolen. They are less like divine inspirations and more like a collection of patents, a database of technologies and social programs that constituted the operating system of Sumerian civilization. and the keeper and dispenser of these mi was Enki, the chief engineer. A moment of quiet contemplation is needed to absorb this shift in perspective. The dust motes dancing in the beam of a single lamp in the archive seem to realign. The neat rows of clay tablets cease to be a library of a dead religion and begin to feel like the server farm of a forgotten corporation. The silence is no longer about a missing piece of history. It is about the profound, unsettling implication that the entire structure of this first civilization was a hand-me-down, a turnkey operation set up and managed by beings for whom cities, laws, and even humanity itself were simply assets in a much larger enterprise. The air in the room grows colder, heavier. This reframing helps us understand the role of the Apkallu, the seven sages, with greater clarity. They were not simply wise men. They were the implementation team. The records describe them as advisors to the pre-Diluvian kings, the technicians who carried out the initial setup. Oannes, who emerged from the sea, did not inspire humanity to invent writing. He gave them writing. He did not encourage them to build cities. He gave them the templates for the first cities. The Apkallu were the specialists, the field agents tasked with deploying the civilizational software package, among the nascent human population. Their knowledge was not their own. It was the knowledge of the system they served. This places the Sumerian scribe in a new and stranger light. He was not the chronicler of his people's great inventions. He was the administrator of an inherited system. His obsessive record-keeping was not a new human impulse, but the very function for which his species was arguably designed. He was an accountant for the gods, a data entry clerk in a planetary-scale operation. His silence on the origin of the technology makes a new kind of sense. It was not his department. He did not need to know how the diorite bowl was made, only that it was delivered to the correct temple, on the correct date, as per the established inventory protocols. Its manufacture was the concern of a different, higher division. The perfection of the artifacts, then, was not a matter of aesthetic choice. It was a technical specification. A vessel used in a particular process, perhaps an energetic or chemical one we no longer understand, would need to be made of a specific material and machined to precise tolerances, not for beauty, but for function. The object was not a symbol of a god's power. It may have been a piece of the god's equipment, a tool left behind in the workshop. The human artisans who came later with their copper chisels and stone hammers could only look on in wonder. They could try to copy the forms, but they could not replicate the process. The knowledge was never theirs to begin with. Let us return to the archive drawer. We pull out a tablet that is not a receipt, but a list of offerings for the temple of Inanna. It details quantities of grain, beer, and livestock, but it also lists finished goods, a golden ring, a lapis lazuli necklace, a ceremonial dagger. These are objects of known human craft. The scribe records them as products of the temple workshops. But when it comes to the foundational temple equipment, the primary cult statues, the strange, geometrically perfect foundation deposits buried beneath the ziggurat, the texts speak of them as having descended from heaven, or as having been present since the beginning. There is a clear distinction in the records between what humans make and what was already there. This hierarchy is visible in the architecture itself. The ziggurat was not merely a place of worship pointing to the sky. Its Sumerian name, Etemenanki, means the foundation of heaven and earth. It was a connector, a physical link in a chain of command that stretched from the human administrator on the ground, the Ensi or Lugal, to the Anunnaki who resided in the heavens or in their own terrestrial enclaves. The structure was a piece of functional infrastructure, an antenna, a communications tower, a place where the business of the two realms could be conducted. Its design was not invented, it was given, a standard model repeated across the land. The beings themselves are described with a strange lack of emotion. The texts detail their conflicts, their political maneuvering, They're jurisdictional disputes. They behave less like cosmic deities and more like a powerful, technologically advanced, and often fractious clan of colonizers. They are not defined by their goodness or evil, but by their power, their longevity, and their ownership of the system within which humanity existed. They were the landlords of planet Earth, and the Sumerians were their first tenants, living in a house whose plumbing and electricity they used every day, but had no idea how to install or repair. And so the silence that began our inquiry is now populated. It is not an empty void, but a space filled with the shadows of these functional administrative beings. The unrecorded artifacts are not human inventions, but perhaps the tools and property of these others. Date. The king lists are not myths, but the memory of a different order of time and power. The Sumerian civilization is not the dawn of human invention, but the record of humanity's long apprenticeship to a foreign and unimaginably ancient authority. The scribe did not fail to record his world. He recorded it perfectly. He just understood, in a way we have forgotten, that it was not entirely his. This perspective, however, does not solve the mystery. It deepens it. If this vast administrative system was so deeply embedded, if its managers were so present in the records, then the story should be more complete. But it is not. The records are fractured. The continuity is broken. The lists of pre-Diluvian kings are followed by the stark, simple line. Then the flood swept over. This event is not just a geological catastrophe. It is a system failure, a catastrophic data loss from which the historical record never fully recovers. The world after the flood is a world of ghosts and echoes, an attempt to reboot a system from a corrupted backup. The presence of the others, so clear in the earliest layers of the tradition, becomes more distant, more abstract over time. They recede from active management to a more symbolic role, their names and stories gradually accreting the layers of myth and religion that we are more familiar with. We are left holding the fragments of a corporate archive from a defunct enterprise, trying to piece together the nature of its business and the identity of its executives from invoices, memos, and a single, strange list of long-serving CEOs. The most important files, the ones explaining the core technology, the mission statement, the ultimate fate of the leadership, appear to be missing. The world before the flood and the world after are separated by a scar in the earth itself. At sites like Shuruppak, the city of the last pre-Diluvian king, archaeologists have documented a sterile layer of riverine silt, meters thick, devoid of any sign of human life. It is a clean break in the stratigraphic record, a line of clay and sand that separates the layers of a lost world from the foundations of our own. There are no tools in this layer, no pottery shards, no bones. It is the physical, geological evidence of a profound and total interruption. For an unknown period of time, the place where a great city once stood was silent, submerged beneath a quiet, muddy water. This layer is not a metaphor. It is a tombstone for an entire epoch, a silent, earthen monument to a world that was washed away. The civilization that emerges above this sterile deposit is recognizably Sumerian, yet it is also a shadow of what came before. The earliest post-Diluvian pottery is simpler, the architecture less ambitious. It is the work of a culture in recovery, a society of survivors clinging to the memory of a former greatness. They rebuild the sacred cities on the exact same spots. They reinstitute the rituals. They restart the ledgers. But something has been lost in the transmission. The artifacts of impossible precision, the diorite bowls and granite vessels, are found almost exclusively in the layers below the flood deposit, or as heavily curated heirlooms in the earliest strata above it. They are the relics of a lost technological grace, inherited by a people who now work with humbler tools and a more limited understanding. The continuity has been broken. This rupture is not just physical, it is informational. The administrative record continues, but it has lost its anchor to the deep past. The post-Diluvian sections of the King List record reigns that, while still long, are a fraction of what they were. The orderly, monolithic stability of the pre-flood world gives way to a more chaotic history of competing city-states and fragmented authority. The scribes are still meticulous, but the system they are documenting is a damaged one. They are no longer the administrators of a seamless, primordial order, but the chroniclers of a world struggling to remember the organizing principles it once took for granted. The signal from the past has become weak, corrupted by the static of a great cataclysm. And what of the Apkallu, the 7 sages who brought the foundational knowledge? The textual tradition places them firmly in the world before the flood. They are the advisors to the long-lived kings, the dispensers of the civilizational me. After the great inundation, their presence recedes. They are remembered, revered even, but they are no longer active participants. The direct transfer of knowledge from the non-human source appears to have ceased. Later Babylonian traditions speak of human sages, the Umanu, who study the ancient texts and attempt to interpret the wisdom of their pre-Diluvian predecessors. The flow of information is no longer a direct download. It is now an act of scholarship, of archaeology, of trying to reconstruct a lost science from its fragmentary, half-understood records. Here, we must pause. The silence we are confronting now is not the silence of a single unexplained object. It is the silence of a severed connection, the quiet that follows a system-wide crash. It is the sound of a culture trying to rebuild itself from a corrupted backup, with the most important files permanently lost. The world after the flood is a world haunted by the ghost of a superior technology, a more profound order. The scribes record the world they have, but the very structure of their histories points to a greater world they have lost. The antagonist is no longer just an absence in the record. It is the event that broke the record in the first place. The weight of such an interval is difficult to comprehend. It is a void not just of information, but of continuity. To acknowledge it is to participate in an act of remembrance that spans millennia. In the space below this transmission, do not write a comment. Instead, simply mark the time of your watching, and the single word, interval. Let it be a quiet, collective recognition of a pause in the record, a moment to honor the profound silence that separates one world from the next. It is a small ritual to acknowledge the presence of the great, invisible antagonist that is absence itself. To truly understand the depth of this recurring pattern of loss, we must travel further back in time, to a place that poses an even greater challenge to our sense of history. We are in southeastern Anatolia, at a site known as Göbekli Tepe. Here, some 12,000 years ago, 6 millennia before the first cities of Sumer, nomadic hunter-gatherers erected the world's first known megalithic temple complex. They quarried, moved, and raised limestone pillars weighing up to 20 tons, carving them with intricate reliefs of animals and abstract symbols. It is a feat of social organization and engineering that, according to the standard model of human development, should not have been possible for a pre-agricultural society. It appears in the archaeological record with no apparent prelude, a sudden, inexplicable leap in cultural complexity. The ultimate mystery of Göbekli Tepe, however, is not its construction, but its death. After more than 1,000 years of use, for reasons we may never understand, its creators deliberately and painstakingly buried the entire site. They filled the spaces between the great stone circles with millions of cubic feet of earth, animal bones, and stone debris, entombing their own sacred world beneath an artificial hill. This was not an act of abandonment or destruction. It was a conscious, organized act of concealment, a decision to erase a chapter of history from the landscape. Here, the invisible antagonist of silence and erasure becomes a tangible, deliberate force. A world was not just forgotten. It was intentionally put away, hidden from the future. Between the burial of Göbekli Tepe and the rise of Sumerian civilization lies a chasm of nearly 6,000 years. This is not a gap in our knowledge, but a genuine quiet in the archaeological record. The high culture of Göbekli Tepe appears to have no direct descendants, no clear line of influence that leads to the later civilizations of the Fertile Crescent. It is as if a great light was switched on in the Anatolian highlands, burned brightly for a millennium, and was then intentionally extinguished, plunging the region back into a long twilight of simpler, less organized societies. History did not proceed in a straight line from this point. Instead, it seems to have taken a profound detour, abandoning a level of achievement that would not be seen again for thousands of years. Let us move forward in time again, to the 7th century BCE, to the city of Nineveh, capital of the mighty Assyrian Empire. Here, King Ashurbanipal, a ruler obsessed with the past, assembled the ancient world's greatest library. He sent scribes throughout Mesopotamia to collect and copy the knowledge of the Sumerians, Akkadians, and Babylonians who had come before him. His goal was to create a master archive, a complete record of his civilization's intellectual heritage. The thousands of tablets recovered from his burned palace form the bedrock of our modern understanding of this world. It was a monumental effort to defeat the forces of forgetting. Yet even this great library is a testament to what has been lost. The colophons at the end of the tablets often tell a story of fragmentation. Scribes frequently noted that they were copying from an older, broken original, or that certain lines were unreadable. Ashurbanipal, with all the power of an empire at his command, was already engaged in an act of salvage archaeology. He was collecting the pieces of a tradition that was already ancient and deeply fractured in his time. He was confronting the same silent antagonist we face today. The decay of records, the gaps in the story, the slow, inexorable pull of entropy that wears down clay and memory alike. The end of the library is its own lesson in loss. When Nineveh fell in 612 BCE, the conquering armies burned the palace to the ground. The fire that destroyed the empire, however, had an unintended effect. It baked the clay tablets of the library, firing them like pottery and preserving them for millennia. This act of violent destruction was also an accidental act of preservation. But it forces us to ask a difficult question. The library contained the knowledge of a civilization that wrote on multiple media. How many thousands of records on perishable materials like papyrus, parchment, or wooden boards were turned to ash and smoke in that fire, their contents lost forever? The silence that emanates from that ruin is the sound of a world of knowledge vanishing in an instant. The flood that left a sterile layer of silt, the deliberate burial of a megalithic world, the fire that consumed a royal library. These are not isolated incidents. They are nodes in a recurring pattern of catastrophic data loss. They suggest that human history is not a continuous, cumulative ascent. It is a series of brilliant, luminous epochs, each separated by a dark age, a period of collapse and profound forgetting. The antagonist is this cycle itself, the periodic destruction of knowledge, the erasure of the record, which ensures that each new iteration of civilization must begin again from a lower baseline, working from the scattered fragments of what came before. We are a species with a recurring amnesia. Perhaps this is why the stone artifacts have survived to speak to us. Stone endures fire and flood. The diorite bowl from Uruk, the granite plate from Abydos, the andesite blocks of Puma Punku, they are not just technological anomalies. They are informational survivors. They have persisted through the great intervals of silence that consumed the more fragile records that might have explained them. They are like hardened data drives recovered from a wreckage, their contents intact, but their operating system lost. They are messages from a world before the last great erasure, physical evidence of a knowledge that was once operational, but is now only a silent material mystery. The weight of what is missing is immense, far greater than the weight of what has been found. The work of the historian, of the archaeologist, is not the confident assembly of a complete story. It is the patient mapping of the edges of a vast, dark continent of ignorance. We are not reading a book with a few missing pages. We are trying to reconstruct a lost library from a handful of scorched fragments. The silence is not a void to be filled, but the very medium in which the past exists. It is the fundamental context, the ocean of forgetting, in which the few small islands of memory are found. We see the researcher once more, a solitary figure in the quiet of a university vault. The light on the table illuminates not a single object, but a collection of disparate photographs and transcriptions, a cuneiform sign from a Sumerian tablet, a geometric pattern from a pre-dynastic Egyptian pot, a carving on a pillar from Göbekli Tepe. The figure draws a faint line with a pencil, connecting these 3 points across a map of time and space. The line is tentative, an inquiry, not a conclusion. It is a gesture made against the overwhelming silence, a quiet refusal to accept that the fragments are meaningless. It is an act of faith in the idea that a pattern, however broken, can still be perceived. And so, this act of our inquiry must close not with a discovery, but with a deeper appreciation for the void. The mystery is not contained within the artifacts or the texts. It is the void. It is the sterile layer of silt. It is the buried temple. It is the burned library. It is the thousands of years of undocumented history. It is the space between the records, the silence between the layers. The antagonist is the nature of time and memory itself. To truly understand the past is not to solve its riddles, but to learn to stand in the presence of its profound and resonant absences, and to listen to what they do not say. Let us now stand back from the fragments and look at the shape they form in the half-light. We have held in our hands the physical evidence, artifacts of impossible precision, cut from the hardest stone, their existence a quiet refutation of the accepted technological timeline. We have sat in the silence of the archives, surrounded by the textual evidence, the administrative records of a deeply practical people, whose own histories begin with a prelude of impossibly long-lived kings and a world-altering flood. For centuries, these two sets of records, the material and the written, have been held apart, studied by different disciplines, placed in separate drawers of our understanding. But what if they are not two different stories? What if they are two parallel, perfectly synchronized accounts of a single, unacknowledged reality? To consider this is to propose a fundamental shift in our understanding of what civilization is. The story we have told ourselves is one of slow human invention, of a linear march from primitive hunter to city builder. But the evidence, when viewed together, does not suggest invention. It suggests inheritance. It points toward a model not of emergence, but of transference. The sudden appearance of a complete system of law, agriculture, writing, and social hierarchy in Sumer was not the culmination of a long local development. It was, perhaps, the installation of a pre-existing operational framework, a civilizational starter kit delivered whole and ready for deployment. The knowledge was not created. It was received. This framework gives a new and chillingly pragmatic context to the beings the Sumerians called the Anunnaki and the kings who ruled before the flood. They were not gods in the sense of divine, ethereal beings to be worshipped. They were the source of the system, its original authors and administrators. The texts portray them as such. A council making executive decisions, an engineer overseeing a biological project, a commander assigning jurisdictions. Sumerian civilization was their enterprise, a large-scale project on a new world. Their concerns were not spiritual, but logistical. The world they organized was not a cosmos. It was a territory under management. And in this model, humanity's role becomes both clearer and more unsettling. The Atrahasis epic describes our creation as a solution to a labor problem, the engineering of a subordinate species to carry out the physical work of maintaining the system. We were not the masters of our own world, but its first workforce, its first local administrators. The meticulous, obsessive nature of the Sumerian scribe was not a unique cultural trait. It was a job requirement, the fulfillment of the very function for which his kind was designed. He was a clerk in an ancient and vast bureaucracy, keeping the ledgers for a management that was not human. The artifacts then cease to be mysteries of art or ritual. They become what they appear to be, pieces of advanced, functional hardware. The diorite bowl was not an offering. It may have been a component in a process, a piece of industrial equipment whose precision was a technical necessity, not an aesthetic choice. The strange gear-like objects were not symbols. They were mechanisms. These objects are the durable remnants of the original infrastructure, the tools and devices left behind by the founders of the enterprise. They are the physical assets of a technology that was once operational, a science whose principles were never shared with the local labor force. The global nature of this pattern is no longer a coincidence, but a clue to the scale of the operation. The recurring technological signature in Egypt, in the Andes, and in other ancient sites is not evidence of cultural diffusion, but of a standardized deployment. It was a franchise, a global rollout of the same core system, adapted for local conditions, but built upon the same foundational technology and the same administrative memory of a primordial, non-human authority. The impossible stonework is the brand, the unmistakable sign of the same architects at work across the planet. The history of our world may have a single, silent parent company. And the flood, that great and recurring scar in the memory of all mankind, takes on the character of a catastrophic system failure. It was not merely a natural disaster, but a fundamental collapse of this planetary-scale infrastructure. It represents the moment the original administrators lost control, or perhaps withdrew their active support, leaving their vast project to run on its own decaying momentum. The sterile layer of silt is the physical evidence of this great interruption. The break in the textual record is the moment the network went down, the link to the central server severed for good. The world that emerges from the waters is a world of survivors, a post-apocalyptic society struggling to reboot a civilization from a corrupted backup. The kings with their shorter reigns, the loss of high technology, the shift from direct knowledge transfer by the Apkallu to the mere interpretation of old texts by human scholars, all are symptoms of a culture running on a legacy system it can no longer repair or fully understand. They are haunted by the memory of a golden age, a time when the system worked perfectly, when the connection to its architects was still live. Our history does not begin with a birth, but with a recovery from a near-fatal accident. This reframing forces us to look again at the great acts of erasure, like the deliberate burial of Göbekli Tepe. What if this was not an act of human forgetting, but a conscious decommissioning of a part of the system by its original operators? A shutting down of a major network node, a careful and deliberate removal of a key piece of infrastructure before a planned withdrawal or a system-wide change. The silence then becomes something far more active than simple loss. It becomes a strategy, an act of concealment on a geological and historical scale, leaving behind a world wiped clean of its most potent secrets. The implication, then, is this. Our entire recorded history, from the first marks on a clay tablet in Uruk, is not the story of our beginning. It is the logbook of the aftermath. It is the vast, sprawling, and often contradictory record of the inheritors, the survivors, chronicling their long and painful attempt to operate a world whose original purpose and instructions were lost in the crash. The dawn of history, as we have so proudly called it, may in fact be the beginning of a long twilight, the moment when the lights of a former world finally went out, leaving us to find our way in the darkness. This thread of thought does not lead to a destination, but to a different kind of journey. It does not promise answers, but a more profound engagement with the questions themselves. To follow it is to become a keeper of the enigma, a curator of the resonant silences in our shared past. And for those who choose to remain on this path, the patterns do not resolve. They only grow deeper, echoing across time in ways we are only just beginning to comprehend. The story is not over. It has merely returned to its most fundamental questions. If this framework holds even a sliver of truth, it reframes the very definition of humanity. It suggests that our species' most profound genius may not be for invention, but for adaptation and administration. We are masters of operating systems we did not write, of using tools whose fundamental principles are beyond our grasp. Our entire global civilization, with all its glories and its flaws, might be a kind of cargo cult on a planetary scale, a complex society built around the misunderstood rituals and decaying relics of a technology and a memory that are not, and perhaps never were, our own. The silence of the Sumerian scribe is finally given its proper context. It was not a failure of curiosity or a lapse in the record. It was a matter of professional discipline, a recognition of an absolute jurisdictional boundary. The scribe's domain was the world managed by humans, the barley harvests, the legal codes, the daily temple operations. The technology of the others and the history of their deep past were simply not his department. They were part of the foundational infrastructure of his reality, as natural, as unnoteworthy, and as far beyond his need to explain as the movements of the sun and stars. This perspective shatters our scale of time. The 5,000 years of recorded history become a brief, chaotic epilogue to a story that was orders of magnitude longer. The impossibly long reigns of the pre-Diluvian kings are no longer a myth to be dismissed, but a faint, distorted echo of the true timescale of the previous world order. We are not the protagonists of a long and heroic story of our own making. We are the inhabitants of a brief moment, living in the ruins of a temporal empire so vast that its full duration has become inconceivable to us. We are left then, not with a theory, but with a single, vertigo-inducing question that rearranges all the evidence we have examined. What if the ruins we so carefully excavate from the desert sands are not the foundations of our civilization, but the debris of theirs? What if the history we have written for ourselves is merely a story we began telling in the middle, a narrative constructed to make sense of a world we inherited but did not create? What if we are not the first intelligent life to build a global civilization on this planet, but merely the next, living in the long, deep shadow of a legacy so profound we have mistaken it for our own invention? The inquiry recedes, leaving this implication to hang in the silent air of the archive. The light falls once more on the diorite bowl, that single, perfect object. It is no longer just a vessel of stone. It has become a key, severed from its lock. It is a component of a machine whose purpose is forgotten. It is a single, stray word from a language that is no longer spoken. It is a message from a world that ended long before our own began, a quiet, physical testament to the idea that the greatest mystery is not what we have found in our past, but the scale of what we have forgotten. The inquiry draws to a close, not because a conclusion has been reached, but because the light is failing. We are back where we began, in the quiet hall, after hours. The air has not changed. The dust still settles on surfaces, on time itself. But something within the observer is different now. The silence in the room is no longer an absence of sound. It has acquired a texture, a weight. It is populated by the ghosts of unasked questions and the shadows of records that were never kept. We have not found an answer. We have only learned to better appreciate the dimensions of the void, to understand that the silence was the destination all along. The journey was not through history, but into the structure of its own forgetting. Before us, the diorite bowl rests in its glass enclosure, unmoved. It has absorbed the entirety of our long vigil and has offered nothing in return. It makes no confession. It does not yield the secret of its own making. Its perfect, polished surface reflects back only the dim light of the gallery and the faint outline of a figure standing before it, a temporary witness to an endurance that defies mortal scales. The object is not a clue waiting to be deciphered. It has become the question itself, rendered in stone. It is a perfect physical embodiment of a silence so profound that it has outlasted the civilization that kept it, the language that surrounded it, and the gods who were once named in its presence. Nearby, a single clay tablet rests on its mount. A simple administrative text, perhaps a receipt for a shipment of cedar wood from a distant mountain. The scribe's hand, though gone for 5,000 years, feels present in the precise, confident impressions left in the clay. One can almost feel the rhythm of his work, the methodical press of the stylus, the focused mind of a man cataloging his world, making it accountable, pinning it down in neat rows of cuneiform. His was a world of tangible things, of quantities and deadlines, of order imposed through the sheer force of meticulous record-keeping. It was a world knowable, manageable, and above all, writable. His reality was built from such lists, and so they remain side by side in the quiet of the modern world, the unwritten object and the written ledger. They are the two poles of a reality we can no longer fully access. One speaks of a mastery over the physical world that we cannot explain. The other speaks of a mastery over the social world that formed the very foundation of history. They were found in the same layer of earth, products of the same moment in time, yet they seem to originate from two entirely different universes of knowledge. The gap between them is not an oversight. It is a message. It is the most honest statement the past has left us, that there was their world, and then there was the world they were permitted to record. Perhaps the act of recording is, by its nature, an act of separation. To write something down is to place a boundary around it, to define it, to make it part of a human system of accounting. What lies beyond that boundary is not necessarily unreal, but simply outside the jurisdiction of the record. The Sumerian scribe may have seen no contradiction at all. The diorite bowl was a fact of his world, a piece of foundational hardware as given and as unnoteworthy as a mountain on the horizon. It did not need to be explained or documented because it was not a product of his world. It was a prerequisite for it. His silence was not a failure to see, but a profound understanding of his own place within the system. The great figures from the lists, the Anunnaki, the long-lived kings, also recede with the failing light. They are no longer a potential explanation, but part of the enigma itself. Their presence in the record feels like a fading photograph, a memory of a former authority whose operational details were already being lost to the mists of time, even as the scribes copied their names. We have been studying the administrative structure of a decommissioned world, sifting through the archives of an enterprise whose original management has long since departed. The story is not of their presence, but of their slow, inexorable withdrawal from the world of men, leaving behind only a legacy of strange artifacts and even stranger memories. The walls of the museum seem to dissolve, and for a moment we are outside, under a vast and silent sky. The desert stretches to the horizon, a landscape of profound emptiness and immense antiquity. The wind, the oldest voice in the world, shifts the sand across the buried foundations of Uruk and Eridu. This is the land that witnessed the entire story, from the first city to the last abandoned temple. It holds the dust of the scribes, the kings, and the forgotten artisans. Its scale is humbling. It reduces the grand sweep of civilization to a brief, luminous trace, a fleeting pattern of light and order on a canvas of geological time. The land does not remember. It simply endures. Time itself feels different here. It is not a river flowing from past to future, but a deep, still ocean. What we call history is merely the surface, agitated by the winds of human affairs. But beneath it lies a quiet of immense depth, a realm of forgetting that holds the vast majority of what has been. The artifacts we have examined are not messages in a bottle sent to us from the past. They are things that have sunk to the bottom, and then, by some strange current of chance, been washed ashore onto our own small island of the present. We can hold them, we can measure them, but we cannot know the world from which they came. We can only stand at the edge of that dark water. Looking up, the stars are the same points of cold, distant light that glittered over the first ziggurat. The scribe saw them not as poetic symbols, but as the gears of a great cosmic machine, the markers of a divine and predictable order. He recorded their movements with the same dispassionate precision he used for barley rations, because they were part of the same overarching system of administration. The silence of the heavens, the silent turning of the constellations, was the ultimate context for his work. Perhaps the silence in his own records regarding the origins of things was merely a reflection of that greater, cosmic quiet, a recognition that some truths are not meant to be spoken, only observed. No answer has been found here. No final revelation has emerged from the dust of the archives. The journey has not led to a solution, but to a more honest and profound formulation of the question itself. We began by asking how a single object was made. We are left asking what it means to inherit a world. The mystery has not been solved. It has been properly framed. It has expanded beyond the walls of any single museum or the pages of any single text, until it fills the entire landscape of the past. The question is not a problem to be fixed. It is a space to be inhabited, a quiet vigil to be kept with the things we can never fully know. In this final quiet, the inquiry becomes a personal one. The feeling that remains is not one of intellectual frustration, but of a deep and resonant melancholy. It is the strange and powerful sensation of remembering something that you have never known, of feeling the weight of a history that is not in any of our books. It is a quiet recognition that we may be living in a story that began long before our own first chapter, a story whose opening pages are lost to us forever. What remains is not the satisfaction of a puzzle solved, but the quiet awe of a mystery truly seen, a mystery that we now carry with us out of this hall of shadows. The narrator's watch is over. The low lights of the gallery begin to dim, one by one, a slow retreat of the present from the domain of the past. The objects are returned to their native element. The darkness, the silence. They have been here for millennia, patient and undisturbed. Our brief visit, our temporary disturbance of their long quiet, is at an end. We have been granted a brief audience with a mystery that does not belong to us. And now we must withdraw, leaving it to its own timeless conversation, to the slow, silent work of enduring through the ages yet to come, waiting for the next curious eye to peer into its still and reflective depths. The final image is a slow retreat from the diorite bowl. As the last focused light upon it softens and fades, its form is gently reclaimed by the encroaching darkness. Its perfect curve, its impossible sheen, holds the last of the light for a moment, a final, fleeting gleam of polished black against the growing shadows. Then it too is gone, not vanishing, but merging with the deep and profound quiet of the closed room, the silent earth, the starless night of a forgotten memory. It does not cease to exist. It simply returns to the state in which it has spent the vast majority of its long existence, unseen, unlit, and at peace in the heart of its own enigma. The story is not over. It has simply returned to the silence. The question has not been answered. It has only been remembered. And in the quiet that follows the final fade to black, this is what remains: the faint, resonant hum of a world just beyond the edge of our own, a history that was not written down, but was built, endured, and was finally, carefully, forgotten. The rest is the patient work of listening to the shape of what is missing, a vigil that does not end when the light goes out, but in truth has only just begun.